Okay, now we believe it. We're confident. We need to get out and make things happen. We tend to sit back and let the secular people run the board. So let's talk first about general tactics, and then I'll get into some specific tactics. We don't, I say we, I'm talking mostly to myself here, but we often don't listen very well. We're busy, talking to people, and we've got our ideas, we want to get it across to them. And sometimes we don't even know what their position is because we haven't really listened. And so it wouldn't hurt to do maybe a little more listening. And maybe keeping it simple. I think sometimes if we've learned a lot, we want to do a data dump on people, and maybe they didn't really want all that information in the first place. So we could start by keeping it simple. And this sounds kind of heretical at a church, to say start without the Bible. Anybody have an idea what I'm talking about here? Why would I say that? Doug?
Maybe like building a relationship over just like reading the Bible first.
Yeah, relationships. Trace?
Start with common ground with the things that they accept.
Yeah, the shields are up. The minute you say, well, Romans says, Michael?
Well, and that's what Paul did in Athens. He was in an audience that had no clue about the Jewish religion and the book.
Yeah.
So he started without the Bible, basically.
Yeah. We're going to actually get around to Acts 17 a little bit later tonight. And then having resources. Isn't that, I mean, for me, that's one thing I'm trying to do with all of you, is to keep feeding you resources, things that you don't have to get them all. I'm not telling you to do that, but have a few good websites in mind, one or two kind of general apologetics books, just things that people have already, we're living at such a great time when it comes to apologetics. People have thought this stuff through, people with some amazing degrees and amazing background. So the information is out there, and we don't have to know it all. We can say, I'm not sure, but I'll get back to you, and we can go find out. It's there, it's available. How about this? Admitting we don't know something. The worst thing we can do is come up with what we think is the answer, and everybody finds out later, oops, that wasn't really the answer. Now we're tarnished. It doesn't make us look very good. This is far better just to say, I don't know. I have no idea. That's an interesting question. I'll think about it. Get back to you later. This is something I think is a really interesting point, and that is, if you are challenged, this is one thing if you're out spreading the word and you're the one who's the initiator, that's one thing. But what if you're in a conversation and somebody makes a claim to you that's not necessarily anti-Christian, but just something you don't really buy into? Usually our response is to say, well, I better have an answer for that. Whether it's like, I don't think there's a God, or I don't trust the Bible, whatever it is, we all want to say, oh yeah, but we should trust it. But who bears the responsibility? Whoever makes the claim. So the ball is in their court. It's not in our court. If they're the ones that say, I don't believe there's a God, they've got to supply some reasons. Were we talking about that last week? I mentioned Christopher Hitchens. And he had that debate with Frank Turek, and he never came up with any reasons why he was an atheist. All he did was attack, cheap shot, funny line. But you got done with that, and it was just a bunch of hot air. And yet, he bore the responsibility. Turek took the responsibility. He did a great job saying why he thought there was a God, but Hitchens didn't do that. So who bears the responsibility? The person making a claim.
One more thing, I guess,
Trace?
to go along with that, take it one step further, and they may try to claim the default position. Well, my position is the more reasonable unless you prove otherwise. And I'd say we should grab a hold of that and say, well, no, the fact that there's something rather than nothing, the fact that we've got evidence of a designed universe, seems to me I get to claim the default position, unless you prove otherwise.
That's a good point. Kids grow up thinking there's a God. I think that is the default position. We look at all of this around us and say there's got to be something more to that. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't finish that last thought down there. As far as questioning authorities, would you agree just because somebody's got 5 degrees after their name, that doesn't necessarily mean they're the expert? They often have some kind of bias, some kind of prejudice that's involved in that. I always think of Richard Dawkins. He's my favorite atheist. He's a fun guy. So Dawkins one time said, forgot what he was, let's see, I got to remember what he was talking about. Jesus never lived, that was it. He said, Jesus never lived. So somebody said, where are you getting that? And he said, there's this German scholar, and he quotes a guy's name. So somebody looked it up. You know what this guy was? He was a scholar about German literature. He had no background when it came to studying manuscripts and ancient history or any of this stuff. And finally, he had to pull it back and say, oh. But, you know, he has a lot of degrees after his name. They're in biology. And here he is making pronouncements about ancient history and manuscripts and the life of Jesus. So, you know, we don't have to just take anything with a bunch of degrees after their name and trust it. By the way, after COVID, doesn't this sound a little bit more reasonable now to, to question authority without going down a political rat hole tonight?
We understand.
Yeah, just leave it at that. But I mean, a lot of people have had a lot of degrees and have said things that are just, you know, 180 later. So how about some specific tactics? Asking good questions is always the way to go. It's less responsibility for you and it's responsibility for the other person. So I'm going with Kokel's information here, and if you've heard it 10 times, you can just kind of roll your eyes back for just a minute, but this is always good, refreshing information. If somebody makes a claim to you, the first thing you want to do is make sure you understand what it is they're claiming, right? So you're just asking a clarification question. So what do you mean? So you're not being snotty about it, but you're just curious to know what exactly is the claim, because you don't know how to deal with it, grapple with it, if you're not sure exactly what the claim is. And then after you find out, okay, I got it, I figured that out, the next question is, so where's the support? Because that's an argument, isn't it? It's a claim, and then you support it with whatever evidence you've got. Otherwise, it's not an argument, it's just a claim. You can just say, okay, you don't have any proof for it. So it takes the pressure off you. Right. You're the one asking the questions of the other person. Remember who's got the responsibility there. And actually it shows interest. You're making a connection with that other person. And it gives you a little time to think when they're expounding what it is that they believe. So let's try this out as a class. Somebody says to you there's no God. What could you say as a response? Now, the position for a Christian is to say, yes, there is, and here's evidence. But let's take it in the question mode at this point.
Why do you think there's not a God?
Yeah. See, you're probably not going to ask them the first question about what do you mean by that, because they're going to say, I'm talking about God. So that probably is a waste of time. But you could say, why do you feel that way? What's your support? And see what they say. Right? All religions are basically the same. What's a good question?
But all but one.
All but one.
You got to work your way to heaven. Christianity, you don't.
That's true. But you're giving an answer. At this point, we're just asking questions, right? Yeah, Rick's ahead of the game here. But what's a good question to put on them? Eric?
Why do you think that?
Yeah. Why do you think that? Or how are they the same?
How are they the same? Yeah.
And my guess is, for most of them, you're going to get a long silence because they just spout this stuff. It's parroting. You know, they've heard this over and over and over again, but they never really... You think they're even researching religions and they've studied religions? That'd be another good question. Oh, so you study religions? Well,
Well,
how about this? The Bible's been changed over the years. I don't trust it. Now the first question works, doesn't it? Isn't this the key word? Really, it's been changed. If you're talking translations, of course it's been translated. Nobody's going to argue about that. It's been translated a lot of times. My guess is maybe what they meant was somebody's left some information out that was in the original, or they've added information in. Maybe that's what they mean. But you got to get that clarified before you can even begin to grapple with something like that. The fetus is human, but it's not a person. That's a pro-abortion argument. What's a good question? Again, you could argue, the anti-abortion route, but asking a good question would be what?
what makes a person?
Yeah. What's the difference?
Yeah, I don't.
By the way, there's no good answer for that. There's no answer for the difference. They'll struggle and they'll struggle. But they've heard it. This is a pretty common fallback. Okay, it's human, right? You got me. But it's not a person, so therefore do whatever you want to it. What's the dividing line between person and human? Christians are narrow-minded. What, aren't you? Is that what, and he says, aren't you? See, that's a really good answer, actually. It's a good. Why is it when I have a point of view, I'm considered narrow-minded, but you have a different point of view, but you're not narrow-minded? How does that work?
Yeah.
And you could just ask for a definite, what do you mean narrow-minded? Well, you think you're right. Well, don't you think you're right? But you're not narrow-minded. I'm the only narrow-minded one. Okay, I see how that works. One-way street there. How about this? I believe in evolution. And your question would be?
Macro or micro?
Yeah, what do you mean by evolution?
I believe you did come from a monkey. Did you come from, not me?
Because, you know, if you're just talking change over time, if that's what they mean, we're in the same category, right? We're okay with that. Churches change, people change. I mean, yeah, nobody's got that. But if they're talking about from one-cell creature to us today, now we got some fighting to do on that point.
On the one, as the Bible's changed over the years, one thing I point out is you can't know that it's changed unless you know what it was.
Yeah, there you
How
go.
else are you going to know that a change has been made? So if you know what it used to be,
Yeah.
what's the problem?
Yeah, yeah, that's what Bart Ehrman has spent his whole career on, talking about all the changes in the Bible, and you can't trust it anymore. But apparently he does. He trusts it at one time, and then something took it off track. I love this. This is such a popular way to I don't want to say trip people up, because that's not the point. We're not trying to trip people up, but to get them to think about their argument not working very well. People will often end up doing something called a self-refuting statement. So let's talk about what it looks like first before we get into the Christian element here. So if somebody tells you I can't speak a word of English, why is this self-refuting? Because the statement just defeated what it's claiming. Does that make sense? They just spoke in English. So obviously you don't have to pay any attention to this statement because that's incorrect. I told you a million times not to exaggerate. You remember when you're young and your mom would say something like that? I told you, this is not the time to bring that up with moms, right? So don't bring it up then. But I love that, a million times. All English sentences are shorter than 4 words. It's more than 4 words. Oops. So these things are called self-refuting statements. Now, it sounds kind of odd, but you'll catch on because they're all over our language. Let me give you a few here. You shouldn't make moral judgments. You Christians, you're always making moral judgments. You shouldn't be doing that. What's the self-refuting part of that statement? Somebody just made a moral judgment on you. And again, it's not snotty, it's not mean, it's just showing people that they've made a claim that doesn't have any sense behind it. They're the ones that made a moral judgment as well. So we're back to square one. There are no truths for everybody. Every truth is just up to you.
Is that a true statement?
Apparently, this is true for everybody.
What about false statements?
I mean, there are no...
If there are no truths, then there's no false ones then either.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. But if you just take this literally here, there are no truths, they just made a truth claim. Don't force your morality on me.
That's what you're doing.
That's exactly what they're doing. They're telling you, don't do this to me. They're forcing their view on you, which again, you can turn it around and show them. How about this one? Christians are wrong to judge others. Who's being called wrong? We are.
Yeah.
So who's doing the judgment? They are.
They are.
God used Darwinian evolution to design the world. What's the science behind at least the view of Darwinian evolution? How did everything come about? Accidental. Total randomness. Now how do you have a God designing an undesigned system? How does that work? By the way, this is a huge problem for the people that fall in the camp. When you talk about the age of the earth and how did Genesis come about, what happened back in Genesis. You got this group of people, they're pretty well-financed and all. They're called theistic evolutionists. You ever heard that term? Yeah. Theistic? It's got that word, theist, that's God, but they still believe in evolution. And I may have read a lot of this stuff, but I've never seen them able to put these two things together because they're contradictory. God is a planner, Darwinian evolution is a non-plan. It's just accidental. So It's either, it can't be both. How do you combine the two?
I'm not so sure.
The other one I like down here a lot. I took this off of a, I don't know, website one place. Does everybody know who Bill Nye is? The bow tie guy?
Fake science.
Yeah, he's now the head of Planetary Society. And I used to get all their material and I quit because they've kind of gone off the rails, at least in my view. But they're a pro-science, pro-astronomy, pro-space organization, and they've done a good job for a long time. I used to grit my teeth because Carl Sagan was involved. And this is no improvement, by the way, to go to Bill Nye. So he debated, who's the guy with Young Earth? Ken Ham. Yeah, I had a debate with Ken Ham. And this just cracked me up because he wasn't aware of what he's saying here. I know nobody likes abortion, okay, but you can't tell somebody what to do. What did he just do? He told us all what to do. So he wasn't aware of this. Most people aren't. They just say these things and they're self-defeating arguments. How about a specific tactic? Coco's got another name for it. I like the Eagles, so I'm going to use this. Anybody heard okay, this is an old Eagles song called Take It to the, okay. Yeah, take it to, okay, never mind. But so this is an Eagles song, so I kind of like it. So how this works is somebody makes a claim, and you ask yourself, what's the principle that they're putting this claim on behind this other person's view? And then you show that the principle doesn't work because you take it further than that person intended, but you're staying in that basic principle, which I know at this point you're going, what? That doesn't make any sense. So here's an example. Somebody tells you homosexuality is a natural urge, so it's okay. So you see the principle there apparently is, forget homosexuality for a minute, but what are they really saying? Any natural urge is okay. Really? So you're saying any natural urge is okay, but what about rape? That's an urge for some people. Smashing someone in the face with your fist? And they're going to say, no, no. Well, okay, then apparently the principle of any natural urge is okay. That's a bad principle. So take that off the table. Let's start again and work whatever else you want to work on here. Here's some practices. People make up their own morals. Is there a principle there? Really, you're going to make up your own morals? So they're assuming everybody's going to do nice things. But if you make up your own morals, can't you steal stuff from other people, according to this? That's a bad principle. Make up your own morals. Have you seen what the human race has done? Adolf Hitler made up his own morals. That didn't turn out very well. Yeah. Pol Pot, Mao Zedong, on and on. So again, they're going to say, well, I don't mean to. Well, okay, the point is, they're basing their principle there on something that's pretty shaky. Any behavior is okay as long as we don't hurt other people. You ever heard that one? That's kind of like minimal ethicist talk there. Is there a problem with that if you stretch that out? Anything is okay if you don't hurt somebody. You think of anything outside of this sentence here? What's that?
Robbing a bank.
Yeah, robbing a bank, that didn't hurt anybody. They're okay. Maybe just had a fake gun. And the bank will, they probably had that money insured. But that doesn't seem right. Anything else you can think of that you say, well, people aren't hurt, but...
What about the hurt that causes the responsible party here? Their own self.
Yeah, this is a hard thing to define. What do you mean you don't hurt people?
You could be hurting yourself.
Yeah, I mean, they used to talk about, let's say, prostitution, a victimless crime. Really? You're ruining a family, and you're ruining the woman, and, so as long as you don't hurt other people. There are a lot of things. How about being a peeping Tom? That doesn't hurt anybody. You want somebody in your neighborhood doing that? Well, hey, I'm not hurting anybody. Go about your business. This doesn't make any sense. That's a terrible principle. Same-sex marriage is fine since they love each other. Do you see the principle here? As long as people love each other, marriage is okay. Can you think of anything that's way beyond what they wanted when they said that? Because they're thinking of two adults, two males or two females. Can you stretch it out and make it absurd to the point where they're going, well, that isn't good. Yeah, it's because the principle is bad. What?
If you love your dog.
Yeah, why can't you marry a collie? Dogs love us. Why can't you marry your daughter? Why can't 8 people marry? I mean, this just opens a huge can of worms, doesn't it? And they're going to say, no, I don't really mean that. Okay, then that's a bad principle to say love is the basis for anybody who chooses to get married here. Diane?
I was just thinking, marriage is, by definition, was created by God. And I've never understood why same-sex people need to be married.
I'm with you.
Does it make sense?
Well, they're looking for
Tax write-off or something, is that it?
part of it, but I think they're just looking for society to pat them on the back.
Yeah, they're just challenging.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Women should have the right to choose abortion. So do you see what's being said there? People should have ultimate choice about anything in this society. In this case, abortion. But could you stretch it and say, well, you don't have a choice of everything. Isn't there that old story about you can't go into a crowded movie theater and yell fire? You ever heard of that one? See, we don't even have ultimate free speech in this society. We talk about free speech, but you don't have free speech. You can't libel people and slander and do all this kind of stuff. And so there's a limit to this. So this is a pretty poor argument.
Shouldn't the baby have a right to choose to live?
What's that?
Shouldn't the baby have the right to
Yeah.
choose to live?
Should the baby have a right to choose to live? Yeah.
Yeah, and
See, that bothers me when...
to make poor choices right there. I talked about this
What,
with
Doug?
a friend where like the statistics overwhelmingly showing abortion, how like most 90+% are choices not within, certain emergencies or something like that.
Yeah.
Isn't it bigotry? Because probably at least half of the aborted babies could be women.
That's true, yeah. Yeah, they're killing women. I think the key word there, too, is the right. I mean, I think about pro-choice as the symbol that people, they have their buttons or their signs or whatever. The question is pro-choice to do what? Well, we don't have ultimate free choice to do anything we want in this society. We have limitations that don't hurt other people. Okay, so a few things just to remember here, and this is good news. The results aren't up to us. We're just gardeners. We're just, preparing the ground. Maybe somebody else will come along and make a change in that person. So if we're interacting with somebody and they just say, no thanks, okay, that's not a defeat. That's not up to us to twist our arm into the kingdom. That's God's work anyway. The reason I mentioned this is I didn't want to forget it. Somebody loaned me a book on Steve McQueen this week, and it's written by Greg Laurie.
I remember that story. There was a movie about it too.
Yeah. Well, this is really wonderful. And the reason I'm mentioning it tonight, and I don't have a lot of time to go into details, but McQueen had I think there are 3 people in his life that on their own, without anybody else getting involved, gave him the message of salvation. And for the first 2 times, he blew them off and didn't seem to care. One guy was one of the best stunt men in Hollywood. In fact, I guess he was the best. And Steve McQueen just said, yeah, good for you. And so that guy wasn't discouraged, I don't think, but eventually the seed got planted, and McQueen started going to this church and sat down with a pastor at that point. By the way, he died of cancer. Yeah, right. But here's the news, and I didn't know this till I read the book. He became a Christian before that, so he didn't panic hearing that he was going to die and then run to go get salvation. People would be pretty cynical about that. No, he came to Christ first, and then it was given the diagnosis that was, life-threatening. All we should do, like Greg Kokel always says, put a stone in somebody's shoe. That's our modest goal. All we're trying to do is get people to think about these things. We may not get them all the way to the foot of the cross. Okay, well, that's God's deal. And here's the good news. I don't think most people have really thought through religious ideas very well. They say things because they've heard them, but they haven't really thought them through. We're on pretty solid ground with most people, just because you've taken the class here. Here's another thing to think of. We get better through practice. First few times might be a little shaky. It's okay. God will use whatever you do. Even if all you do is ask questions and you can't think of a good answer, you just say, okay, that was good to hear. Facts and reason are on our side. That's good news, isn't it? I love that. And then we got to make sure it's the ideas that irritate people, not us. Christians can sometimes step on toes, Okay, so any questions on that? We'll do the second one here in a second, but Any questions or comments? Okay. So now we know we should be getting out and doing something, but it's sometimes kind of hard to get a spiritual conversation going, isn't it? It ends up kind of like this. I don't know if you can see that very well there, but it's kind of like something's dying in the conversation at this point. We don't know exactly what. Even this guy looks upset. So what do we do instead? We feel awkward, so we do fallback positions, talk sports.
Talk sports, yeah.
Hey, nice day today. Yeah, finally got done with the rain for a while. How's work going? Oh, not bad. And we pass each other. Good dinner, huh? So we're staying on the surface. We don't know how to dive down. And I think it's for a lot of reasons. One is maybe fear. Lack of time. I got to admit, if people come to my door, it's pretty rare when I say, great, I got an hour or two, come on in and let's grapple with these issues. I want to kind of hit the deck, get down low. Lack of confidence, maybe. Maybe it's our personality. This is one of my favorite little deals. Introverts, unite separately in your own homes. Maybe just not sure of some good techniques. And this is the thing, I can't really take care of introverts. That's not my job tonight, but maybe we can talk about some techniques that might help. So just different ways. This is just kind of a grab bag of things to think about. One I think is really important. We did a book, it must be 8 or 9 years ago. It's just called Relational Apologetics. And it talks about making a connection with people rather than just standing on a street corner with a sign. People don't react real well to those kinds of things, but if you're in their life, there's more of an opportunity there. So just getting to know somebody and not necessarily assuming that they're really sold on what they're involved with. Like we have a neighbor who's Mormon. And after talking to him for a while, I've figured out he's Mormon because he married into the Mormon faith. He's not real solid on that stuff. So, but that's one of those things where you go, okay, he's a Mormon, he's probably, hardcore, and not necessarily. And if you're talking to somebody who's a New Ager, what is it exactly that they believe? Because you don't want to just make an assumption until you really get to know them. Showing interest and making a back and forth kind of thing. Hey, could I ask your opinion about something? You're kind of asking for permission, and you're opening yourself up to saying, I'd like to hear what you have to say. And doing one more time, listening is a really good thing. But these are just under the idea of making a relationship there, whether it's at work, at home, friends, family, whatever it is. Asking questions, what do you think about such and such? There's so many areas that you can do that question with. Okay, so what are some good particular questions? Do you think some things are really right and wrong? Is everything ultimately just a material? Is that all there is to the universe? And notice, by the way, this is not putting somebody in a corner. You're not saying, are you going to go to hell when you die? I mean, there are times you want to do that maybe, but do you think there's any single true religion? Who do you think Jesus of Nazareth was? Might be surprised some of the answers. Why should God let someone into heaven? Ray Comfort does this question a lot. You ever heard Ray Comfort? Yeah, he's interesting. He just does street corner evangelism. And he always does the bad news first before the good news. He says, are you a good person? Yeah, I try to be. So he just starts going down the 10 Commandments. You ever lied? You ever dishonored your parents? Or whatever it is. And pretty soon he says, well, let's see, we've established you're a liar. You're whatever. And you're like, okay, oops. Do you have any spiritual resources? I remember this stuck with me. Steve Brucker mentioned that a while back in one of our classes. He said somebody at school, when he was teaching, told him, hey, I've got cancer or something like that. And Steve said, oh, so sorry. Are you getting help? Yeah. And then Steve asked this question, do you have any spiritual resources? Again, you notice it's vague enough that you could probably get a reaction somehow. How'd you become fill in the blank, because I've talked to the neighbor about this, being a Mormon or whatever it is. Just you're asking. You're not telling them you're wrong. You're just curious about how they got involved. Do you think the Bible has any value today? I don't know. I don't know what they would say. What do you think happens to us when we die? Wow. Nobody likes to think about that, but I'll send you a list, by the way. Greg, I won't dig it out now, but Greg Kokel sent out a list a while back of the way he approaches things is he starts with a key question. Do you think God exists? If people say yes, he's got a list of questions that head off that way. If people say no, he's got a list of questions that head off from that. So I'll send that out to you as an attachment. Okay, so that's a really nice one to do. And again, if we haven't talked about it enough, Steve and I love the work that Greg Kokel does at Stand to Reason, str.org. And he's probably I don't know, he's like every man. I mean, he's just perfect for everybody to learn more about apologetics and all. He's very kind and soft-spoken, and he's not not over anybody's head, and a really interesting guy. Here are some other ways to engage, just being alert. I think if we just open up and look what's out there, there may be places we go to that we're hanging around, and other people are hanging around, and conversation can happen, not necessarily. I have a friend who was getting tires changed, and there were some people sitting in there in the waiting room, and there was a couple right next to him that were having a discussion about I don't know, some area of religion. So he got involved in that in a nice way without, sticking his nose in, but it was kind of interesting. Just these things where you're bored to tears anyway, and chance to get a discussion going. I'm going to show you some examples of just being alert physically, observing things, and then watching for certain actions that people are doing. So let's talk about these two for just a minute. General observation, sometimes it's just the look of people. What are they wearing, and what are they reading, and what are they doing? You're just observing this, and you can make a connection maybe at this point. I'll give you some examples. I don't know if you can see it very well. Here's a shirt that says "Naughty by Nature." And I thought, that's actually a biblical statement, isn't it? That's not the way this person meant it. That's what the Bible says. Yeah, we're all naughty by nature, worse than naughty. Right? We could say, hey, downright evil. This is a tattoo that kind of gives me the creeps. I don't know, you might ask a question about that. If I'm in class at school and I look around a lot and I'll see students with a t-shirt, and during a break I'll say, so what's the message behind this t-shirt? Or I'll do one-on-one conferencing, I'll see somebody with a bunch of lines of tattoo there, and I'll say, what does that say? And so, just being observant. How about what they're reading? Lord of the Rings. That's a real Christian book, by the way, so it'd be a good way to get a conversation going there. This is pretty scary stuff if they're reading The Secret. I think it was a year ago or so we talked about different religions, and I talked about New Age, and I used this book as a key example. If you see somebody reading that, you're in for the long haul because this is a real strange look. You create your own reality. That's the basic message here. So if you're not doing well, it's your fault. You're not making your reality happen. So that's part of the New Age message there. How about what they're doing? Are they watching TV? This has become a big deal, The Chosen. And then I just did, odds and ends here, but maybe they're real TV watchers and they've gone binge-watched an entire series of something or other. I mean, these are things we can talk about. People like to talk movies. They like to talk TV shows. That's a good way to get a conversation going. And it's just about everything here has a message. All these movies have a message. Most of them are not Christian, but their message is there. I always use the example, Sharon and I saw a movie some time ago called Rio. It's a story of these birds. It's a computer animated film. And this bird can't fly. He's really embarrassed about it. And toward the end of the movie, he's told, follow your heart. And then he can fly. And I thought, that's a terrible message, isn't it? Jeremiah says, follow your heart, you're just going to go right off a cliff. But I mean, so there's something right in that movie that was just out and out, blatantly anti-Christian there, but you could get a conversation going, I would think. Bumper stickers are really good things to look at and ask if somebody's got a sticker on their car. I saw that. Karma. Okay, kind of an Eastern religion view. I just saw this on the internet. I haven't seen it on a car yet, but do you see the message here?
I followed one through San Marcos last night that had that.
It did.
It also has
Coexist.
wording underneath, coexist something or other.
Yeah. The coexist one I've seen a lot, but this one's even worse than that. Coexist says, you religious people have a problem. If you straighten yourselves out, the world would be wonderful. Now this one says, forget it, you guys are all terrible. You're all toxic. Against abortion, then don't have one. By the way, why is that a terrible message?
Oh, man, unbelievable.
Substitute for abortion, how about slavery?
Murder, yeah.
Yeah, against murder. But you put anything up here, but we're not talking about what we want to do or not want. We think this is bad for society. So against slavery, then just don't have a slave. Let other people have their slaves. No, we didn't do that. Fought a civil war over that. William Wilberforce about killed himself off to get rid of slavery. He didn't have a slave. He didn't say, well, I don't have a slave, so I'm okay. He said, no, it's terrible for society. There's the coexist.
So that's the one I saw.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. We've got one of these signs in our neighborhood, and I walk past it, and I keep hoping somebody would be out there, and I'd like to talk to them in a nice way. But do you ever see these signs? And again, I don't know if you can see it. In this house, we believe. Black lives matter, love is love, women's rights are human rights, no human is illegal, science is real, kindness is everything. I mean, there's just a field day of, mottos that you could take a look at there. And without getting political, because I don't want to go down the Black Lives Matter thing, but do you see that love is love thing? We're back to that again. As long as it's love, anything's okay.
Worked
Science
great in the
is,
60s.
what's that?
Worked great in the 60s.
Yeah, we really did, didn't it? Science is real. I mean, there's a message there, especially for us Christians, that we're anti-science, which is absolute nonsense. But I mean, so you look at things like yard signs. I call this go fishing. Do you ever just throw something out there in a conversation and see what happens? Again, you got to, be a little careful. But you drop some hints, what you've been watching, what you've been reading, whatever it is, where you went. Here's the thing, you probably don't want to use some of this language here because that'll probably turn off a conversation pretty fast. But you can talk about the books or whatever it is that you're reading. Maybe you carry a book with you that you're reading, Lee Strobel or something like that. I know people that get on planes and they'll have 2 or 3 copies, keep them out of sight and have one in front of them. Somebody says, what are you reading? Here we go. You got a conversation starter there. How about a t-shirt? I've got a t-shirt at home I love to death. It's this one. You guys ever seen this one? Dead, cross, ka-chung, 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 life. Is that have the whole Christian message there? It's just, wow, it just knocked me out. I thought, wow, I hadn't seen that until a few years back.
I saw what, I wish I owned it. There's 2 things I'm sure of. Number 1, there is a God. Number 2, you're not him.
You're not him, yeah.
That's for Shirley MacLaine, right?
Walk around a New Age convention with that.
Of course, the Strobel books are wonderful because people at least now have heard of the movie that they made out of it. How about reacting to the culture itself? I mean, just think about all the things that are going on around us that we could react with somebody else here. The shootings, movies that have messages, songs. There's a website for my age, because I don't know what kids are listening to anymore, but there's a place called access.org that has, it's run by young Christians. So they help families who have young kids at home that are getting involved in social media or songs or whatever to kind of pull them apart and see what's actually in the song. And some of them are pretty negative.
Of course, Jesus Revolution is a good one to talk about.
Yeah, that's right. Brand new one that's just out. Kelsey Grammer's doing all sorts of interviews now because of that movie. So, TV show. I put Lost up here, but obviously there are more newer ones than that. But I mean, Lost had some messages like crazy in that. Da Vinci Code. Again, it's dating me. I know it's not popular now, but everybody was carrying around a copy of the Da Vinci Code. That would have been ideal to get into a conversation with because it was a blatantly anti-Christian book. Casting doubt on the historicity of Jesus and the Gospels and all this kind of stuff. It looks like a fun read. It is. I've read it. It's a fun read. Maybe some of you read it. It's a good whodunit kind of thing, mystery, action, chase stuff. But you get in about 200 pages, and all of a sudden this character named Lee Teabing comes in, and it's just tearing down Christianity, which is all right, but it gives you some place to go. And this is Christopher Hitchens' book, God is Not Great. So, people may be looking at that. I wanted to talk about, this is what Michael brought up, when Paul was in Athens. What did he do? He looked for some way to contact their society rather than saying, I brought you a Jewish scroll. That's not going to go anywhere with these people. So what does he say in Acts? I see that you're very religious. And I went ... I'm not putting the whole thing here, but I even found an altar with this inscription, to an unknown God. Now what you worship is something unknown. I'm going to proclaim to you. So what did he do? First thing was, he said, this is what you're involved with. Let me connect with that. Rather than just coming in and saying, I'm a Jew and I've got this view of God, you ought to adopt it. It's like, really? That's a separate kind of thing, but he's connecting to the people here because he saw this altar. The Athenians want to make sure they hadn't goofed and left some god out. So it's kind of like, okay, we got whatever, Jupiter, and we got this and that. Who are we leaving out here? I don't know. To the unknown God, right? So don't get mad. We got you covered. Here's one right here. So points of contact for us would be just any area that we would share with somebody else that's a non-Christian. I mean, we have so much in common because of our humanity. And I wanted to mention this magazine. I always bring it up. I might have even mentioned it last week. This is my latest edition. It's called World Magazine. And it's kind of like a Time magazine for Christians. So it immediately gets you to connect. It does movies, it does books, it does sports, it does science, it does all these fields of interest that you can read about, and you can make a connection with people who maybe don't share your faith or anything. So it's called World Magazine. I just said you end up avoiding conflicts if you do this. Just making a contact with somebody. And you can set up a relationship. Hey, how about such and such? And all of a sudden you're in a conversation. So here are some just possible points of conflict, contact. It depends what you like and what you spend your time on and what your friends are. But love of nature. We're in a society today that's very environmentally concerned. And so if we love nature and animals or whatever it is, we've got a point of contact with somebody who's not a Christian. Maybe it's a moral issue. We've had these school shootings and all sorts of horrific things. Train wrecks, yeah. Ukraine. So you got all of these big issues that people have been thinking a lot about. Maybe it's history. Maybe you got a friend who's a real history nut and you talk about religions as they got started and all. Maybe it's aesthetics. You love art, music, things like that. Good places to get conversations started. Just a sense of God that's out there. We all have this sense of God. That's what I mean. Reality's on our side. Ecclesiastes says we've got eternity in our hearts. God planted that in us. So if you hear somebody say something like, I'm spiritual, not religious, you can say, you bet. Of course you're spiritual, because you are flesh and you're a spirit as well. Maybe it's a hunger for value and purpose. What's it all about? Why are you here? I mean, people have these kinds of questions. I'm old enough, I remember there was a song by a singer back in the 50s. Her name was Peggy Lee. Look up her song sometimes, and it was basically a What's It All About song. Yeah, and she has no answer. And in the song it says, if that's all there is to life, then let's just drink and be merry. If that's all there is. And that's how she ends up. So nothing positive. It's just, the total bleak view of the non-religious person. And then just some last thoughts here. One more time, God's the one who's in charge. Thank goodness. I'm not. He'll be the one that will save. All we have to do is be faithful. That's it. We may not, like I said, we may not even get a good statement out. We may just ask a question. And somebody goes, I hadn't thought about that before. And then they walk away from you, but they've got that thought going around in their head. And there's the stone that Kokol always talks about. So what's the point? We don't want to do this. We got to get in the game.